Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with a quick deck guide. This time, a deck we've played a couple times on the channel, but I never did get around to making a deck guide to it because, well, people were saying I was doing too much content for it at the time. But Boros Convoke. Now this is a deck that kind of burst onto the scene a couple months ago and has become a mainstay as one of the tier 2 aggro decks in the format, up there with mono white humans and spirits variants as the hope for keeping tribal / aggro alive in a format increasingly dominated by mid-range combo and control. So Boros Convoke is kind of what happens if humans, mono white humans, and Gruul Tarkak's command have a child. It is a low-to-the-ground aggressive deck that gets on the ground very quickly with 1-drops like Thraben Inspector, Voldaren Epicure, Giant Killer, Legion's Landing, and Ornithopter, and then tries to convoke out these Knight Errant of Eos, which allows you to gain some value looking at the top 6 cards of your library and picking 2 creature cards, where X is the number of convoke creatures you've used, and Venerated Loxodon, when it comes into play for each creature you use to convoke it, puts a +1/+1 counter on it. And then one of the centerpieces of the deck is a Gleeful Demolition, which allows you to blow up one of your own artifacts to make 3 1/1s, making the go wide strategy that much scarier. The deck produces quite a few early artifacts. You have Thraben Inspector makes a clue, Voldaren Epicure makes a blood token, Ornithopter itself obviously can easily be blown up. And then you have a bunch of things that make a bunch of bodies. Resolute Reinforcements, 2 bodies into play. Clarion Spirit, each time you cast a second spell each turn, you get a 1/1 spirit, so on and so forth. And then finally, Reckless Bushwhacker is a way to kind of give everything haste and smash your opponent very, very hard in one turn. Rest of the deck, Legion's Landing we've already kind of commented on. It kind of helps you cheat on your mana count a little bit by being a land when you attack with 3 or more creatures. And then you play a bunch of dual lands. You play some man lands in the form of things like Den of the Bugbear, once again making a bunch of extra bodies. Some versions use the various different deserts. This one choosing to use Sheffet Dunes to pump your team. Sideboard is a myriad of different cards. Basically spot removal, ways to beat the mirror match, and ways for grinding matchups. As far as grinding matchups, generally you're bringing in the cards like Wedding Announcement and Invasion of Gobbledygook. I don't think anyone knows how to actually pronounce this card, but basically it looks at your opponent's hand much like some of the white creatures do lately. Takes a card out of it, puts it in exile, they can cast it for 2 more, and then once you attack it down, for each creature that attacks each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can sacrifice it to give your creatures indestructible and hexproof, making sweepers significantly worse against you in the post-board games, at least ones not named Temporary Lockdown. Cathar Commando, this is a 3/1 that allows you to blow up artifacts or enchantments, very good against the Fires decks, against some of mono white, or against some of Azorius's temporary lockdowns, etc. Declaration in Stone and Running Volley are different removal spells for different situations. Deck in Stone pretty much cleans up everything, with the price being your opponent gets Clue Token, unless they're all tokens. Seismic Stomp is a way to break through board stalls. Running Volley, this comes in against a number of matchups. The Mirror Match, Mono White Humans, Spirits, Angels, and against Greasefang. And then finally, Forge Devil is an interesting one. Enters the battlefield, does 1 damage to target creature, 1 damage to you. Allows you to deal with annoying things like your opponent's elves and such, or potentially coming in the mirror match and dealing with your opponent's 1-drop. Taking a look at a different version of the deck. The other variant of the deck tends to leverage Burning Tree Emissary. Now the problem with Burning Tree in a lot of these builds is you have a lot of white spells, so it doesn't really help cast those, other than obviously the generic mana for your white sources. However, what it pairs quite nicely is with your Bushwhacker turns. This allows you to go Burning Tree Emissary into Bushwhacker, and then only have to have 2 mana as a way to trigger the Surge. Beyond that, the other card some of these versions play is Forbidden Friendship, which does pair also nicely with Burning Tree Emissary, as opposed to some of the white 2-drops like Clarion Spirit. Makes a 1/1 dinosaur, makes a 1/1 human soldier. The dinosaur gets haste, but a lot of the same cards. Nothing too fancy in the main deck here. Mana Confluence is a way to kind of balance out the mana requirements with some of these, especially with Burning Tree Emissary. Sideboard, there are a few different options in this one, but they largely play the same role. Pithing Needle can shut down annoying permanents of your opponents. Planeswalkers and such, slowing them down, can also slow down something like Thespian Stage or Karn. Magmatic Chasm is a way to punch through board stalls, much something like Brave the Elements does for the mono white deck, or the other version we looked at plays Seismic Stomp. They do much the same thing. As far as Convoke's role in the format, it is an aggressive deck that has a reasonable Rakdos mid-range matchup. The nice part about this deck is instead of being a bunch of singular creatures, this deck often makes a bunch of tokens, which means you can just overwhelm your opponent's board presence and make their spot removal kind of clunky and useless in some regards. That said, you are a little bit more vulnerable to sweepers, things like Deafening Clarion, Temporary Lockdown, Supreme Verdict, so you are a little bit worse against something like Blue-White Control. Where the deck really shines, obviously, is aggro mirror matches and against the slower combo decks like Lotus Field combo, where you tend to struggle with a deck with a bunch of sweepers and interaction, or decks that just go faster than you. So decks like Greasefang combo, Blue-White Control, Blue-White Azorius Control, Blue-White Lotus Field Control can all be difficult, tricky matchups if you're not careful. You have to manage your resources very carefully in those games and try to get your opponent dead while not exposing too much to sweepers. Strengths of it, obviously, over traditional aggro like mono white humans, a lot less vulnerable to spot removal. The weakness, you gotta commit a lot more resources to the board to make things happen because your individual pieces are not all that powerful. You do have a little bit of a grinding plan with Knight Errant and things like Wedding Announcement, potentially some Planeswalkers like Gideon of Ally of Zendikar as some possibilities. But this deck overall tends to function as a low-to-the-ground aggro deck that puts a bunch of things into play, tries to get your opponent dead as quickly as possible. It is one of the faster aggro decks in the format. It does blank. Individual removal spells quite good, but is weak to sweepers or things that ping a bunch of stuff. So things like Mayhem Devil can certainly pick it apart as well, making the Rakdos sack matchup quite tricky. So overall, a welcome addition to the format, a deck that kind of burst on the scene, but has kind of settled into a tier 2 kind of aggressive deck in the format. Certainly something you should be aware of, and something you might enjoy playing in this, and there is a variant of it that also sees play in the modern format. So if you like this kind of deck, guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for our next video.